Please welcome to the stage Newark Community Street Teams Director, Aqeela Sherrills.
Just wanted to thank Philadelphia Citizen for the opportunity to come and talk about brokering peace and redefining public safety in this country. Because essentially that's what brokering peace is about. It's about residents as a constituency in public safety, right? And I just want to, thank both mayors, Kasim and Nutter, for the great work, and leadership that you provide in cities. I too have a great mayor from the city of Newark, Mayor Rashi Baraka, who was a believer in community-based strategies that allowed us to have record numbers in violence reduction in the city. But I want to share a few things before I talk about the work that we've done in Newark. By first asking all of the black men in the room to stand up for a quick sec. So this is something that I promised myself that I would do in each space that I'm in where black men are present. There was a report that came out about 3 or 4 years ago through DOJ that said that black men are the least helped and the most harmed. Now, I'm not trying to get into the trauma Olympics and everything about who has been harmed or hurt more. But I just wanted to tell black men that I see you, that it is time for us to heal, that I love you, and that I'm invested in your healing journey. Thank you. We're at an inflection point in history. The public execution of George Floyd signaled to us that never again should we see law enforcement as a single point of contact for safety in our respective communities. I mean, safety is far too ubiquitous, to put the responsibility in the hands of one single institution to create safety for us. We live in a country where you say public safety and people say police. Even though police are only one aspect of the ecosystem of safety in communities. Public safety is not just the absence of violence and crime. It's the presence of well-being and the infrastructure to support victims and survivors in their respective healing journey. And so I grew up in a small community west of the Mississippi called Watts, in the Jordan Housing Projects. I witnessed things no child should ever be subject to. And I participated in what many social justice activists call the longest running war in the history of this country, which is urban street gang wars. Between 1983 and 2003 in LA County, there were over 20,000 gang-related deaths. In the late 80s, we were experiencing something like 1,100 murders a year in the city and another 1,500 in the county. I mean, the war was epidemic. Now, the thing is that we cried out for help. However, our cry for help kind of fell on deaf ears because many of the perpetrators and the victims were black and brown youth and young adults. And we still live in a system that's built on systemic racism and implicit bias. So there were no comprehensive trauma centers that were developed to address our trauma and our pain. People didn't see how trauma rippled and festered in communities when there was no strategic support. And so there was a narrative created, right? They called us gang members. And, to me, gang member is kind of synonymous with insurgent, right? It's a label that dehumanizes the person behind it. It desensitizes the public to the crime. Now, those numbers that I gave you, man, there was more lives lost in LA County alone than the Northern Ireland and the Israeli conflict combined. But yet, it wasn't seen as a war zone because it was impacting black and brown youth and young adults. Now, in 1992, myself and my brother and a group of friends, we were instrumental in organizing the peace treaty in our neighborhood that changed the quality of life in the neighborhood. In the first 2 years of the peace treaty, gang homicides dropped 44%. The city noticed our work. They came in, they brought in the academics who studied our work, and the city adopted the strategy. First, it became Bridges 1 and Bridges 2, and then it became GRID, the Gang Reduction Youth Development Program, which is still the name that the city uses now. But because, in academia, evidence-based results doesn't allow the subject name to be listed in first, second, or third position, right? It negates the investigation. And so therefore, we didn't get the credit for the work that we did in our neighborhoods, bringing our own solutions, resolving our own conflicts. We didn't get the credit. Somebody else did. And so we continued to work. I co-founded an organization with Hall of Fame great Jim Brown called The Mayor I Can, took this movement to 15 cities across the country, organizing peace treaties, decreasing juvenile violence nationally. We were invited to other cities around the world, to Northern Ireland, to The Hague, to South Africa, because this phenomenon of gang violence had spread it all across the country. In 2014, I was contacted by Mayor Rashi Baraka, who's been a friend. I'd known the mayor for close to 25 years at that point. In 2004, he was a principal at the biggest high school in the city of Newark, Central High School. He called me on the phone and told me that, he said, man, there's a bunch of kids running around the campus up here and they're wearing purple. And I asked them where they was from and they said they was from Grape Street. Now, Grape Street is a neighborhood that I'm from, where I grew up at, where we organized the peace treaty, and at that particular point had been sustaining the peace element for about 12 consecutive years. And so the mayor was like, hey, I need you to bring some of the guys out here because we got a war going on in the city. Because Grape Street is the biggest Crip gang in the city of Newark and also in the state of New Jersey. And so I traveled with some colleagues to Newark, and when we showed up, the young cats in the city had heard that we were coming, and they was like, they called, Jordan Downs the motherland. They was like, the big homies from the motherland is coming. And so they showed up 400 deep to meet us. And they asked us all these strange questions about, which pocket you should rock the flag in, how you should rock your hat, and, if you have to get up in the morning and stand on the square at 7:30, like they conflated all of the kind of Midwestern gangs with the West Coast gangs. And so we were telling them that, Crips and Bloods about retribution and revenge. There's no philosophy behind that. People lost their lives and their loved ones, and they wanted to just get back. And we were like, you guys have something to teach us, and we have a message to bring to you around ending this violence in the city. So in 2014, when Baraka was elected mayor, he called me up and said, hey, I need you to come to the city and build out my community-based public safety initiative. Because he knew about the work that we had done in multiple cities across the country. And what he shared with me is that I don't want you to do the LA model or the Boston model. He said, we want to create the Newark model. So his charge to me was to build infrastructure, put systems in place, and turn it over to the local people. In the first 2 years of us launching the Newark Community Street Team, when we started in Newark in 2013, there were triple-digit numbers in homicides. Now, Newark had had a coveted position in the top violent city list for almost 50 consecutive years. The South Ward, Newark experienced a rebellion much like Watts in the 60s, Watts in 65, Newark in 67. Most of the professional class had left the city. The trauma had been allowed to fester and to ripple in these communities in a way that was just inhumane. But the mayor had a vision. And so he was like, put the scene together. So we launched a Newark Community Street Team, a three-pronged strategy: high-risk intervention, assertive outreach, victims advocacy, and victim services. And these three kind of like systems that we put together primarily focused on hiring residents, establishing a relationship-based intervention model. We did a study with Rutgers and discovered that 62% of the homicides in 2015 were domestic disputes. But because nobody intervened, they rippled and they became homicides, right? So our high-risk intervention team on the police dispatch responds to shootings and shooting hits. They utilize their relationships to mediate conflicts to a peaceful outcome. Now, understand, our people are not out there willy-nilly jumping out, hey, stop, put the gun down, no. Our folks are highly trained professionals by the Professional Community Intervention Training Institute. They get training in de-escalation strategies, conflict resolution, and we do all of this work through a trauma-informed lens, through a public health frame, right? Because we understand that violence is a public health issue. And that utilizing the public health model, that those who are in closest proximity to the violence should be equipped with the skills, the tools, and the resources to do the intervention, to prevention, and the treatment. And so we grilled that into our team. Our assertive outreach workers doing our forward-facing initiative around safe passage, 14 schools in the South Ward, making sure that our kids go to school every day and they come home safely. And again, we hired non-traditional leaders. 98% of our staff are residents of the neighborhoods that they live in, right? So we make sure that our kids are safe. And so when they see Pookie and Raheem out there standing on the corner directing, traffic in terms of the kids, it deters a lot of violence from happening in the neighborhood, right? Our victims advocacy work is critical because Black and brown folks don't identify as victims. Victim has a negative connotation in the community. And through the state, which always has a huge surplus fund in terms of victim advocacy, victim services and victims comp, we are rarely able to access victim services and victims comp because of a thing that they call contributing behavior, which is a clause in the contract that disqualifies Raheem if he's hustling on the street and he gets shot. They'll say, oh, Raheem contributed to his own harm, so therefore we're going to deny him services. So then we set up something called the Public Safety Roundtable, which is now the most, I would say, effective policy forum in the city of Newark. Over 100 members twice a week. We get together and we talk about everything public safety. We pulled public safety out of the abstract and put it in the hands of the people. Because the reality is that you can't have public safety without the public, right? And so we don't understand public safety because they took civics out of the schools. And very few people understand how the system works so that we can actually access our resources to support us in our respective healing journey. And so I'm gonna skip forward because I want to talk about the impact of NCST and its coordinated strategy on the city in terms of public safety. As I said, when we started our work, we had triple-digit numbers in homicides. The first 2 years, we had double-digit reductions. In 2019, we experienced a 60-year low in the city in terms of violence reduction. Law enforcement credited us, the Newark Community Street Team and its partners, with being a strategic partner in terms of helping to reduce violence and crime in the city. We went from 103 to 51 homicides in 2019. In 2020, while violence spiked all across the country, Newark's numbers remained flat. One shot, one homicide, it's too many, as the mayor said. But in the middle of the pandemic, we only had 51 homicides. We also had a 12,000-person protest in which our mayor led it, right? And didn't have not one arrest in the city. This is because the street team was on the front line. Then we had our motorcycle cops that everybody loved. Then we had the clergy that everybody loved. And then we had our regular patrol on the outskirts. In addition, in 2020, our officers didn't fire their revolver not once. Unprecedented. And this is strategic relationships and partnerships. Now, NCST is not an alternative to policing. We're a complementary strategy, right? Because our cops need support. The system of policing is challenging, right? Especially for Black and brown cops too. It's a cowboy culture, If a cop says that I'm having an emotional or psychological break and can't show up fully rooted in their humanity, you get rubber gunned and desked. And it threatens their ability to provide for their own family. So we advocate for the officers. At the Public Safety Roundtable, it's not a polite circle now. When officers are doing great, we celebrate them. And when they ain't doing so good, we get in their ass. Because that's what the public is supposed to do. We're supposed to push each other to our growing edge. Now, NCST, in this 5 years that we've been in existence, we started out with grants from Victoria Foundation, from Prudential Healthcare Foundation from New Jersey. We're so fortunate that philanthropy seeded our work. $350,000 in grants, 16 independent contractors, 2015. Today, we're close to 60 staff, $6 million in contracts. We're the anchor nonprofit of the South Ward, and the neighborhood owns safety in our community. We moved from, and then we launched, the city's first hospital-based violence intervention program. We got 3 community health workers who were embedded in the trauma unit. We launched the South Ward Trauma Recovery Center because we recognize that a lot of our folks, although if you say mental health, people are running the other way. But if you say wellness check, it's a little different spin on the word. That's why we don't call ourselves victims. We call ourselves survivors, right? So, we've also just completed a document that allows us to be the lead on OD response. Even though there's a good Samaritan law in place and law enforcement is not to arrest, when someone is ODing, we still know that law enforcement has a relationship with a lot of these folks in the community. And so people are still afraid to call them. Newark had the highest population of overdose deaths in the state. It's a public safety issue. And so it gave us an opportunity, the men and women in NCST, to be able to get trained and respond, right, to some of those issues and some of those concerns. Now, I'm like just so fortunate, to be in service to such a profound group of men and women, who own safety in their respective community. Last year, true to the charge that the mayor gave me to build infrastructure, put systems in place, and turn it over to the locals, I resigned as executive director. Damon Durden, lifelong Newark resident, returning citizen, spent 23 years of his life in prison, is the first executive director of the Newark Community Street Team. And he leads the team. I serve on the board to help with development and all those different types of systems so that we can continue to advance this work. NCSD's story is much like many community-based public safety organizations across the country. Now, I say community-based public safety because traditionally our work has been known as street outreach work or interrupters or credible messengers. These are components of community-based public safety. We define ourselves today because we understand that you cannot have public safety without the public, and that residents and community have to become a constituency in partnership with law enforcement to be able to reduce violence and crime and sustain that reduction. And also, just let me say that our team is not volunteers. They're paid. And they all got to get paid. And they need to be paid better. And I think with that, I just want to say that the Biden administration, at the top of the year, in January, launched a national initiative, the White House Community Violence Intervention Collaborative, to fund and build the capacity of community-based public safety organizations across the country in preparation for the $5.2 billion that's been put in the Build Back Better bill. And NCST, being an inspiration for the president, invited myself and the mayor to the White House. So I had an opportunity to sit in the Rose Garden and listen to the president, the vice president, and the attorney general say that law enforcement is not the only solution to public safety. I mean, this is such, a monumental kind of accomplishment in my life because, not only am I a practitioner of community-based public safety, I'm also a survivor. So I'll close on this, that my son, who I raised as a single father, grew up in the neighborhood, went to university, Proudest day of my life, because I knew that this kid was paving the way for my other children. Come home from college, goes to a party in an affluent black neighborhood on the west side of LA and is shot to death at the party. I mean, I'm no novice to violence, done witnessed it all my life. But nothing ever prepares you for the loss of your child. But you know, I have this belief that where the wounds are is where the gift lie. That you know, it's always darkest before dawn, right? And so, to me, my son gave his life for me. And so, every day that I live and do this work is to ensure that his death is not in vain. We have to navigate our own personal safety on a daily basis, growing up in some of these war zones. Sometimes we have to navigate our safety just in terms of policing. But it's a new day in this country, right? We have an opportunity where we're leading this 16 jurisdiction initiative in multiple cities across the country, building the capacity of community-based organizations to see that residents are now a constituency in the conversation of public safety. And so I want to thank you all for the opportunity to share my story, and turn it back over to you.